In the contemporary landscape of cinema, we see visual effects in quite literally every piece of film, television, or commercial we watch. Christopher Cram quotes, "In 1999, Universal's big-budget reboot of The Mummy had slightly over 200 shots with a visual effects component. At the time, this was considered spectacular. In 2011, even the modestly budgeted comedy Bridesmaids exceeded that total, with around 225. Today's blockbuster, special effects-driven films have well over 1,000 individual shots containing a visual effect." Cram is a VFX supervisor, a member of the production tasked with supervising the use of digital effects so that they visually fit and look natural in the practical film footage. This doesn't mean VFX supervisors will only work in post-production though, as they must also work alongside the director to keep the design of the sets and shots in check, so that they're manageable when adding digital effects in post. Even this entire scene from Dexter Fletcher's 2019 film Rocketman required constant oversight from a VFX supervisor, despite there not being any noticeable digital effects, at least not ones we would expect. Since this film is so recently made, its production had access to a lot of luxuries that weren't available to many filmmakers in the 20th century. One advancement of the last few decades is non-linear editing, in which the original footage is not altered while editing because it is done through specialized software. Before this, the video content had to be accessed sequentially, and adding effects in post was much more complicated due to the manual nature of the process. Post-production visual effects are not just something to come about in the last few decades. In fact, special effects created in post have been around since the beginning of cinema. The use of editing to give the illusion of a transformation, or magic, was pioneered by French filmmaker Georges Méliès, famous for early classics like A Trip to the Moon. However, The Astronomer's Dream is one of his most exemplary works of editing magic, since it is so densely packed with cuts and animations that demonstrate how he was a master of his craft. And despite this being innovative and revolutionary at the time, you could ask anyone today how they did this, and the person would probably say, well, obviously by cutting between a shot of where he was standing there and a shot of where he wasn't. Now, this is the type of cinema that Tom Gunning was referring to in his concept of the cinema of attractions, as, in this short, The Astronomer's Dream, the story, or whatever semblance there is of a story, is merely a supplementary device to let Méliès pack as many little editing tricks in there as he can. But these weren't recognized as special effects at the time, likely because the concept of special effects didn't really even exist. I mean, film had been barely around for like 5 years when this came out. The Oscars didn't even give out a specific award for special effects until 1977, in which year Star Wars won. But of course, in technical terms, they were special effects, and Méliès was overseeing what a VFX supervisor would be doing today. That is, making sure his editing tricks and visual effects believably mesh with the visual design of the set and characters. It is, however, a type of editing that is meant to be noticed, thus the attraction, as Tom Gunning refers to it, which lies in the effects. As films became feature-length, plots became more complex, and, well, the desire to go to the theater just to see a man disappear began to lose its appeal to some moviegoers. However, the techniques employed by early directors like Méliès were refined and further innovated, and since they're so versatile, they were applied to all kinds of varying actions and shots. Visual effects were now not only equated with spectacle, but also utilized to fix visual inconsistencies or to make dangerous shots viable. Stephen Prince says in his book on digital effects in cinema, charting a different investigative direction into digital cinema than more familiar ones that equate visual effects with the provision of spectacle and that regard effects as being mostly incompatible with realism. Visual effects evolved beyond their initial use of being a fantastical spectacle or something to be marveled at. They were now also being used to add realism to a scene and to be unnoticed. That's not to say spectacle never worked in tandem with plot. Spectacle can serve narrative. It can also be a more autonomous artifact of style. There is no necessary and unchanging relation between the two. This scene, in Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress, exemplifies an invisible use of the same basic cutting effect that Méliès used. However, the cut here is still not quite seamless. They presumably filmed the characters hiding behind the log and the gunfire hitting the log in 2 separate shots so as to protect the actors from injury or something. They likely tried to make this cut as unnoticeable as possible. The camera was kept in place, so in theory the morph should be invisible, but due to factors like the position of the sun changing and minor camera shaking, we can see the way it was done. Once again, you could ask the average person today how this effect was made, and they would likely answer, again, by cutting between when they were there and when they weren't there and keeping the camera motionless. But it's also likely that in our modern era of widespread general use of technology, we are able to notice and learn how such things are done much more easily than a person watching The Hidden Fortress when it came out. It wasn't until the late 2000s that portable cameras and recording devices were owned by practically everyone through their smartphones, so it's likely that the average person viewing this in the 1950s had never operated a camera before. This takes me back to that scene from Rocketman, which in my opinion, is an astounding yet subtle use of digital visual effects. The whole musical number is crafted in a way that it looks like Elton John and John Reid are gliding through the locations with ease, effectively condensing a large portion of their lives and representing their descent into a lifestyle of fame and drugs. There are multiple sections of this scene in which we see the use of these same editing techniques used in films like The Astronomer's Dream. This part of the scene, and by extension, the whole musical number, uses clever masking techniques to seamlessly combine multiple takes and shots of completely different sets, costumes, and locations into one artificial yet immersive and consistent long take. When the painting is placed in front of the camera, it's clearly being used as a transition from this dinner table set to this sort of an art gallery location. The characters are in completely different costumes and it takes place in a completely different location, so it's obvious that there was more to it than just putting a painting in front of the camera. For my guess, the way this transition was created is by masking a still image of the painting onto what was likely a blank frame here. The basic premise of creating this effect is structurally the same as the firing squad scene in The Hidden Fortress. However, a technique like the one used for the painting transition was not available to Kurosawa, or maybe just wasn't desired, so the final product is structurally different. The benefits of the digital non-linear editing system of today are exemplified in other sections of this scene as well. Here, when the camera floats by the car lights, another sneaky morph cut is used somewhere in there, as the characters have once again changed costumes within the span of like 2 seconds. Then, for the ending of the musical number in the original theatrical release of the film, the camera zooms in on this model house opening its doors to a record, which is then shown to be hung up on a wall, leading us to smoothly transition to the next scene of the movie. However, deleted scenes reveal that the Honky Cat sequence was actually cut short, and the original transition led us into a new location used for an extravagant finale to the musical number. The efficiency of non-linear editing is that the director could decide in post on how he wanted the scene to end. There was likely a decision made that the dance sequence finale was too long, so to keep to time constraints, it was cut short and replaced with the theatrical transition without a problem. Flexibility like this is a godsend for the editors, and it allows the director to experiment a little more when shooting, since they have the reassurance it can be suited to their liking in post. Going back to Turnock, she says, "Special effects have always easily exploited cinema's ability to massage a reality effect through blatantly artificial means, sometimes embarrassingly so, such as the use of matte, miniatures, traveling mats, rotoscoping, and various other kinds of composites. Furthermore, given the preponderance of visual effects and animation in so much recent cinematic production, any theory of cinematic realism that excludes computer-generated images cannot productively illuminate the cinema's relationship to the illusion of reality." It's possible that in many years' time, a scene like this from Rocketman can be dissected and technically understood by an average viewer, much like we look back on a scene like the one from The Hidden Fortress and are able to notice the inconsistencies. But, as it stands, this scene from Rocketman is effectively seamless in terms of special effects integration and flow. A scene like this would have been nigh impossible to get to work as well if it was attempted in the 1950s or before, because this scene is so strongly aided by the non-linear editing workflow, produced by the digital age of editing with software on a computer.